Well, now let's turn our attention to quantitative data and how we can actually organize and visualize quantitative data. Take a look here at example number 3. Management at the company Initech wants to get an idea about the average number of minutes spent off task per week by its employees. Data was collected from 30 Initech workers on the number of minutes per week they spent off task. Okay, so let's start by filling in again the following table. Start with the population. Again, that's a who question. So notice that the question has to be able to tell me about who this company is interested in knowing something about. Well, the large group would be all Initech employees. That's the goal, right? I want to know something about all Initech employees, specifically the average number of minutes they spend off task. Okay, so my sample would then be some of the Initech employees, specifically the 30 Initech workers who were selected. Okay, great. Now, what variable was the data collected for? So again, I'm thinking about like, what is it that I really wanted to know? Well, apparently what I wanted to know was the average number of minutes spent off task per week. But I can't go and ask that to a person, right? I can't go to employee number 1 and say, what's the average number of minutes spent off task per week by the employees? Right? That doesn't work. So I have to think, what's the question that I have to ask an employee, an individual employee, to get these types of responses? Well, I might be able to ask a question like, how many minutes does an employee spend off task in a week? Right? I can imagine asking that or reformulating it maybe slightly to be like, how many minutes do you as an employee spend off task in a week? Right? I could ask that question. So that's the variable. And then I can think, well, what would be the way that people could respond to that? And of course, I see all the different responses up here in all these numbers. And so, of course, this is indeed a quantitative variable. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start by trying to construct down below in part B a frequency and relative frequency distribution for this data. Now there's some other information here about class widths and where to start a first class, but we'll come to that again in just a second. First, we'll note that we're trying to do the exact same thing that we did before. We're trying to just get some different categories or classes. I'm going to actually write these out here as classes. And then we're going to have frequencies, just like we did when we looked at qualitative data. Okay, so for my classes, notice that I don't have individual words to put down, right? In fact, I have numbers, but I don't just want to put down all my different numbers as different classes. Instead, what I'd like to do is put down different ranges of numbers. Maybe I can imagine saying like anybody that answered from 0 minutes to 10 minutes, they fall in the first group. I can group people up. And so we want to figure out how to make these different groups. We're not going to use a group here of 0 to 10. Let's see. This is where the idea of classes begin, and this idea of class widths. Notice that my first class is supposed to start at the value of 50. So I'm going to go from 50 up to another value. Instead of, though, writing the word to, I'm just going to kind of push this dash in here to indicate it's 50 up to this next value. And here comes something tricky. We have something here referred to as a class width, and it's supposed to have a value of 60. When we talk about a class width, we mean that we want to have 60 different possible numbers as choices for the first class, or as options for the first class. To get a sense of what I mean, let's suppose that I had a class that was 1 to 5. Notice that the numbers then that could fall into that class would be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and the number 5. And so total, there are 5 possible numbers. There are 5 choices here. Whereas if I had a class that went from, say, 2 up to 7, that would be the numbers 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. Notice in there are 6 different possible number choices. So this class width represents this number of choices. And here I want this to be 60. I want 60 choices for my first class. Well, this is a bit difficult, right? Because like, how do I get 60? Well, here's what some people often will attempt to do. They'll go ahead and they'll say, Kyle, I get it. I'm going to add 60, and over here, I'm going to put down the number 110, because that would be 50 plus 60. However, this would be wrong. And you can easily see why over here. Notice, let's suppose I started with 1 as my lower number, and I went up and I added on, let's say, 5. Would that give me a class width of 5? Well, no, because if I took numbers from 1 to 6, I would end up with 6 individual choices. So notice that I would not end up with 5 choices, even though I wanted to have a class width of 5. I ended up with 6 choices. Instead, what I have to do over here is I need to take that 60 and I need to add it kind of going downwards. So this generates the start of the next class. That's what I'm going to do with my class width. So I'm going to go ahead and add 60 moving downward. So if this class starts at 109, then obviously the previous class starts at 110. The previous class ends at 109. Notice that I could keep doing this. I could like go down and create another class by just adding on another 60. That would bring me up to 170, and that means the last class ended at 169. Notice on this side, there was also an increase of 60. Well, how many times do I have to do this, right? How far down do I have to go? Well, the answer to that is, as long as I create enough classes to contain all of the numbers that I have, it looks like my biggest number is 450, then I should be fine. So let's keep going until I get a class that I feel confident would be able to contain 450. So let's see, if I add 60 again, I would be at 230. If I added 60 again, 290. Added 60 again, 350. If I added 60 again, I would be in the 400s. Let's see what's going to happen on the other side. Notice this would be 229. This would be 289. This would be 349. This would be 409. And remember, I'm just adding 60 every time I go down this side as well. So this would end at 469. So notice, this could contain my largest value of 450, and so I know I'm good. It looks like I have a total of 7 classes here. And now I can actually go ahead and actually start to fill in the frequencies. Well, this is going to be a little bit annoying, but at least my numbers here are all kind of ordered. I ask you really quickly to go ahead, pause the video, and see if you can count up the number of responses that fell into each of these groups. And when you hit unpause, you'll see me work through the rest. Okay, so if you did that, you should have found that underneath frequencies, for the first group, you got 5, then 7, then 7, then 5, then 2, then 3, and then 1. And of course, if we were to add all of those frequencies together, we better get a grand total result of 30, which we definitely do. Now I'm going to go ahead and also create here a relative frequency distribution. But since it's kind of annoying to have to write all these classes again, you'll sometimes see that I'll kind of put these all in the same table. And I'll just kind of write one extra row or column here, and I'll put in my relative frequencies. Remember that that's just going to be taking each of my numbers, like frequency of 5, and dividing by how many items there were. So here I'm going to have 7 out of 30, and 7 out of 30, 5 out of 30, 2 out of 30, 3 out of 30, and 1 out of 30, just like we had done when we dealt with the qualitative data. Now, remember, we're always going to be rounding to 4 places, and you can double check me on my numbers here. I think I get 0.1667 after I round. Here I get 0.2333. Of course, this value is identical because it's still 7 out of 30. 5 out of 30 we already did up top, so I'll just copy that value down. 2 out of 30, that's 0.066 with a 7. 3 out of 30 is a nice exact value. I don't have to round at all. It's just 0.10, 10%. And 1 out of 30, well, that's 0.0333. Again, rounding everything to 4 decimal places. And again, I know that if I added up all of those percentages that I have over there, that should get me roughly back to 100%, maybe off slightly based on some rounding error. So this is how I can go ahead and create frequency and relative frequency distributions. Now, we can go ahead and also see that I can take all this data and again, put it into some pictures, again here for quantitative data. So notice I have something first here that's very similar to a bar graph, but we give it a different name. We call it a histogram. There's a couple changes. It's just like a bar graph, but I should note that there are no gaps between the bars. And you can see here that I've listed everything out just like I normally would. I put my classes on the bottom, my frequencies up the side, or my relative frequencies up the side. And regardless of which I do, the picture should look the same. But there are some other sorts of pictures that I can make. We can make something like a dot plot. This is another type of graph that we can produce for quantitative data. Take a look here at this example. We'll see what a dot plot is and how it works. Management at a fast food restaurant is concerned about the number of items that get ordered from their menu past 12 a.m., so after midnight. Data will be used to help figure out how many individuals to assign to an evening shift. Maybe a company would want to do that. The following data represents the number of items ordered past 12 a.m. on 10 separate days. Well, here's the data. Notice that I take that data, and to create a dot plot, I draw out a number line, listing out some different numbers, and then every time a data point comes in, I just put a little dot on there. So notice I can see that 1 happened 1 time, there's only 1 dot. But 4 happened 3 times, because there are 3 dots. Notice this is very similar, or has a similar shape to kind of these histogram shapes up above, because my dots start to kind of form into bars. Obviously, this dot plot only works really well if I have a small number of data points. Like, if I had 10,000 different numbers in this box, there's no way I want to make one of these plots. It would just be super, super annoying. Another type of plot that we have is what we refer to as a stem and leaf plot. You may have seen one of these before in other classes. The idea here is that when we have a set of data, maybe like these, which might represent the price of the order from 8 orders that happened at the fast food restaurant. Okay, well maybe I could organize this. And to create a stem and leaf plot, what I often do is I think about taking my numbers and chopping them, kind of like how this vertical bar here is chopping a 3 and a 20 apart. But when I chop those apart, I'm imagining them indicating different things about my number. Like here, it looks like I chop at the decimal point, right? That's where the line gets drawn. And so I'm kind of dividing every number into its dollar amount and its cents amount. But you can do this with all sorts of numbers. Like say I have the number 23. I could imagine chopping that number into maybe the tens place and the ones place. I could imagine doing all sorts of different chops. But once I do that, I can organize these. Notice that on the left side here I have my different dollar amounts, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. And on the other side I have the different cent amounts listed out. Since here there were multiple times that $6 occurred, it occurred 6 with 60 cents, $6 with 92 cents, I have both of those listed. And if you kind of turn your head, you can almost again see that these create like little bars, right? That I can almost imagine as like a little bar graph kind of listed out here. So I kind of can still see all my information, but still get an idea of which categories have a lot versus a little. So again, it's not super important that we're able to create stem and leaf plots, or create dot plots, or even create a histogram. Although occasionally I may ask you to create a histogram since it's so incredibly easy. But the main goal is that I should know when I have quantitative data, I should know that these are the types of graphs that I can make, and this is a way that I can organize my information using a nice table.